in his kingly throne, Mark Skousen.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's a delight to be here. We just have a closing panel of 20 minutes, so let's quickly introduce everybody. We have Michael Beas, who is our FreedomFest bookstore director, and he's done a great job. Let's give a warm welcome to Michael Beas. He's also a marketing genius when it comes to making books, best-selling books on Amazon, right?
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, in addition, we have Elizabeth Nolan Brown, who's the editor of Reason Magazine. Welcome. We have next to me David Boaz, Vice President of the Cato Institute. You sure you're not the president?
I'm just a fellow now.
Is that right? Is that the official? No, you're vice president.
No, I was executive vice president, but I wormed my way out of management into a fellowship.
Oh, good. Well, we're delighted here. I'm sure that's a more enjoyable role, right? Less difficult to deal with, right?
Fewer difficult personalities.
Yeah. Right. And last but not least, Zilvinas Silenas, the president of FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education out of Atlanta. And how would you do against Enos Friedman in terms of like an NBA player? Would you be able to handle that?
I wouldn't, but at least I'd get to shoot, and that's what matters.
Yeah, for sure, 3-pointers. So to get our program started, I'd really like to, I really felt, David, you presented a manifesto, if you will, a libertarian manifesto in your talk yesterday, or was it the day before? I get confused, but give us the basic thesis of your, it seemed to be a little bit of a critique of libertarians and the way they're seeing things in the world and how we can be more effective. If you could give a short summary, we don't have a lot of time, so just a few minutes summary of your talk, and then maybe we can get a little bit of response from everybody else.
Well, what I said sort of was one of the greatest books that libertarians are supposed to read is The Road to Serfdom, and it made some very important points. But we often tend to believe that the road to serfdom is a description of our world. And we can certainly point to all sorts of things that we don't like, from lockdowns to the impossibility, apparently, of getting government spending under control. But I think we ought to have a more positive attitude. And so I talked about, historically, we went tens of thousands of human years with a society of rigid class status and absolutely no increase in the standard of living or GDP per capita. And then liberalism came into the world, the Enlightenment and liberalism, and that revolutionized everything. It changed everything. And since then, in my view, we have basically been on a road to greater freedom. We've got huge governments these days in developed worlds, but we got rid of conscription in the United States. We have more free trade than we ever did before. We do actually have a very good free speech regime in the United States, and the courts ensure that. But there's a rise of illiberalism in the world, both in the United States and around the world. And so our task right now as libertarians is to defend libertarian ideas and to make them more appealing and effective, but also to defend the broader liberal order, just the general idea of liberalism, of a world of freedom and tolerance and human flourishing that liberalism created, and that many people, well, not that many people, but too many people these days are trying to narrow or even extinguish.
You know, David, you really hit the nail on the head, and I like your optimism because in today's world it's really easy to get depressed about things. Speaking of depressed things, Hayek in chapter 10 of The Road to Serfdom has a famous chapter called Why the Worst Get on Top. So Elizabeth, you have been covering these presidential candidates. Next year's an election year. You've been pretty critical of pretty much every candidate. So is there a candidate out there? Is there something that Reason thinks is a good idea? Or do you see yourself basically as a bystander criticizing and encouraging the right kind of thinking for leadership, political leadership?
Well, I like a lot of Afrobound's platform. I don't know. He's been here at this conference. He's running for president.
You like
He's
him,
calling for a decriminalization of marijuana, making police wear body cameras. But no, I mean, I think at Reason, one of the things we try to do is we are not in the business of sort of endorsing any particular candidates. I mean, individuals might, but as an institution, we're not trying to endorse anybody. We're trying to sort of provide a critical look at what they stand for. So, you know, because there's so much to disagree with on both the right and the left, we end up, I think, yeah, focusing a lot on policies that we don't appreciate from them. We do try to highlight when there are policies that we agree with, but you know, those tend to be far and few between, at least in mainstream political candidates.
Well, I get your almost daily, I think, report from Reason, and you have all these articles and stuff. I highly recommend that. Do they just go to reason.com to get to sign up for that? I highly recommend that. But I did notice that you every article that you have written on Governor Ron DeSantis is negative. And yet he won by a substantial margin in Florida, 60% to 40%. This was kind of unheard of in a state that's 50-50. So apparently he was doing things that resonated with people. So why is Reason so critical about Governor DeSantis?
Well, we definitely haven't read exclusively critical articles. There have been some positive things. We try to highlight, again, when we think he does positive things, like with school choice, with health freedom. He's definitely done a lot of things. Unfortunately, he doesn't extend this sort of classical liberal or limited government principles to everything. There's a lot of things where he has much more big government authoritarian views, and you know, I think we're not trying to be cruel by highlighting the areas where we disagree, but you know, hopefully say you've got the right idea on some things. Can you try to apply that consistently when it comes to other things?
Yeah, and I think that's great that you would do that. Now, Z, you have a think tank, Foundation for Economic Education. Are you as optimistic as David is regarding the outlook of economic education?
I'm a short-term pessimist, long-term optimist. So there's that. My impressions from going to many schools, and last year we delivered lectures to about 60,000 students. It's not as bad as you might think. The problem is that we see the squeaky wheel gets all the grease. So we see the worst examples of schools or teachers, we don't see the best ones, or we don't see actually the average of the mill teacher. Let's say we ran about 3,000 teachers through our training program. I had one complaint. It was 1 out of 3,000, that's pretty good. In fact, when we go to schools, when we talk to teachers, and TK, let's say that TK delivers a lecture, most of the time what we get is people saying, well, can you come back? Can you do that more often? Can you come back every week and talk to our kids? So in terms of acceptance of the message of liberty, I would say it's a very good one. In fact, teachers are clamoring for it. My optimism comes from a fact that I think people are genuinely into our ideas. They genuinely believe that everyone should be free. They genuinely believe in human flourishing and inalienable rights. It's just sometimes either we mess up the rhetoric, or sometimes then you look at what left does. Left doesn't attack freedom head on. No one from the left comes and says, you shouldn't have freedom. No one from the left comes and says, oh, you shouldn't keep what you earn. They always position something next to it. Freedom but equality. Freedom but equal opportunity or equal outcomes. So that's the trick that they use, and we need to get better at rhetoric. But in terms of acceptance of freedom's message, in terms of people wanting to live their lives without interference from the government, it is a very good audience. So that's why I'm optimistic.
You know, this is the 300th anniversary of Adam Smith's birth, and so there's a lot of articles. You've had several articles in Reason on Adam Smith. I'm sure Cato has done some things there as well. The father of free market economics, as he's often called. And he called his model a system of fill in the blank. So did he call it the system of natural equality? No. Did he call it the system of social justice? No. What did he call it? The system of natural liberty. So that meant, for Adam Smith, that was the highest ideal, is liberty. So, Michael Beas, what do you think? You're in the whole area of promoting, marketing, technology, and so forth. Do we have the biggest, the largest? Do we have liberty now in that area? You can pretty much do anything you want in technology, right?
Yeah, for the most part you can, and that's what's crazy. Like, you could write and say anything about anyone, whether it be factual or not, out there. But
are you sure? I thought there was a lot of censorship.
That's what I was getting to. And until you piss off the wrong person, and then they cancel you, and then you're gone, and then you have no voice anymore. So I believe that there are methods of doing so, but more so, you want us to talk about free speech and just saying what you feel. But I feel that still, I find, at least in my area, that a lot of authors are still getting canceled based on the message that they're delivering. So is it really free speech or not? And that's kind of like the debate, the bigger debate that we're seeing right now. And there's other ways. I mean, I've seen authors even take their books and publish them overseas, where you would think, 5-10 years ago, that's unheard of. Like, this is America, right? But again, technology does play a big role, but knowing how to use that technology is really what's going to enable people to get their messages out.
Yeah, very good, Michael. So, 3 out of the 4 of you have used the term left-wing, right-wing. You didn't use it in your introduction, but in your talk, you used left-wing, right-wing. But of course, libertarians are theoretically not left or right, because we are liberally, socially liberal. You would accept that term, correct?
Yes.
And
also
maybe
economically liberal.
Economically liberal in the classical tradition. And I'm glad he's bringing back the term liberal, because that has another name that's been stolen. In fact, I never refer to the enemies of liberty as liberal. I'm very careful on these labels. So this year, our Leonard E. Read Book Award. Read was the founder of FEE. We thought, what a great title for Read This Book. So every year we give out a Leonard E. Read Book Award, and we gave it this year to Hiram Lewis and Vernon Lewis, The Myth of Left and Right, How the Political Spectrum Misleads and Harms America. And I would think this would appeal to us libertarians, because it's hard for us to put us in these little boxes of left and right. So why don't we just abandon left and right and just talk about up and down? You're either an upper or a downer. How about that? Well, Elizabeth or David, please go ahead.
One answer to that, I mean,
we only have a few minutes, but
you said that I used the term. I used it to criticize other people. I said both left and right have elements of illiberalism these days, and I think there is a difference there. You could say it's basically a tribal term. We over here, we're the left, and them over there, they're the right, and they're the bad guys. That sort of
problem.
Yeah. But there are differences. There's the sort of fascist personality cult model that tends to be found on the right, and then there's the party state model that tends to be found on the left.
So if you're called a rightist, you're called a neo-Nazi, or a fascist,
well,
a neo-fascist.
That would be a bad thing.
Yeah, you'd bristle at that, wouldn't
you? Yes, I would bristle at that, and that is a problem with the concept of left and right, because, is the spectrum that Milton Friedman is to the right of Ronald Reagan, and then Hitler is to the right of Milton Friedman? That doesn't make any sense. And you could say the same thing on the left. Is Nadine Strossen to the left of Chuck Schumer? Yeah, because she's a real free speecher. But does that mean then that Bernie Sanders, the socialist, is to her left? That doesn't quite add up either.
So, Elizabeth, would you like to use the term briefly? We got to wrap up, but give us a sense. I've been trying to encourage reason editors to stop using left and right entirely. I've abandoned it for 30 years. So what's your view? Do you think
I mean,
that's an accurate term?
From a philosophical standpoint, I totally agree with you. You know, I think it is, like David said, more apt to talk about liberalism versus illiberalism, because there are liberal, you know, classical liberal on both the left and the right, and there are illiberal people on both the left and the right. Unfortunately, in journalism, you know, it's sort of shorthand when we're talking about things and you're trying to convey things in the least words possible. So we end up having to resort to this language that you're right, is not terribly effective at actually capturing what's going on.
And from a practical point of view, actually, foregoing the labels, because most people, most people are unlike us. They have other things to do than to gather here for 4 days to talk about liberty. Most people care about their everyday lives. So if you approach them with left, right, or Hayek, they will not listen to you. But when you start explaining things to them, why low taxes, why personal freedom is much better, they actually will listen to you without getting into this classification.
That'd be great. So we've run out of time. I would like to recommend Richard Rahn, R-A-H-N, and his columns in the Washington Times. He doesn't use left and right anymore, and he's very effective. So that would be my recommendation. Again, Z, thank you. David, Elizabeth, Michael, short and sweet. And thank you all very much. See you next year, huh?